No need for Little John or a bar to get these kind of shots. In the continuation of our definition series, we're going to talk about two definitions today. The first one is continuous motion, and the second one is a definition of shooting, try, and tap. Now, why are these topics important? Because we have to know what starts a shooting motion, what continues as a shooting motion, and what ends a shooting motion, or the act of shooting. This has foul implications, and it also helps us understand when these things begin. If we know what the act of shooting is, we can award points properly in the correct manner. But before we get started, make sure that you subscribe to the channel, like the videos, and hit the bell for upcoming videos, and also comment if you have any questions. Let's start with the very first topic of this video, continuous motion. Continuous motion for the National Federation is under definitions 4-11. Continuous motion applies to a try or tap for field goals or even a free throw attempt. The only significance is when a foul is by a defensive player, and basically we have a start part with the habitual motion and it ends when the try or tap is in flight. When an opponent fouls, which is a defensive player, the ball handler is allowed to complete their customary motion associated with a try or tap before the ball is in flight. In the NCAA men's rulebook, it is 4-8 under definitions. The definition is very clear. It's a little more simple, but it basically means the same thing. This is an example of continuous motion which relates to being fouled, and the shooter should be allowed to continue their motion towards the basket to complete their shot. Whether they have released the ball or not, they are fouled in the act of shooting. They are allowed to continue that motion. This is a great example of officiating where the official sees the player gather the ball after a dribble and allows them to complete the shot, and not only awards the foul, but awards the basket. Here's an example of off-ball continuous motion.
Straightaway look, buries it, and
we have a foul here by the player in white running through the screen, and if you consider that a foul, this is still continuous motion by the shooter. It doesn't matter who commits the foul on defense, as long as it's committed while the player is in the act of shooting, this is still considered a continuous motion play, and the basket should count whether it has been released or not.
stolen. Miller-McIntyre. This is Jones. Fouled. Counted.
This is continuous motion even though the shooter momentarily loses control of the shot and continues on to the basket and makes the basket. This is properly called the basket should count. This is a good play where the crew works together to get this continuous motion play properly called. The crew discusses it and properly signals the basket to be good. As you can see, the foul takes place as the shooter is in the act of shooting and is allowed to continue that play to end because it is a foul by the defense. It must be noted that talking about continuous motion only applies to defenders who foul an offensive player. Again, it doesn't matter if it's an on-ball offensive player or an off-ball offensive player. Once continuous motion has begun, it must be allowed to finish by rule. Any foul by an offensive player, regardless of continuous motion, does not apply, and the shot should be waved off, or no basket should be allowed if the player has not released the ball. But if the ball is in the air and there is a defensive foul, or what we would call a defensive foul, then continuous motion would not apply because the ball would not be in the hand of the shooter. We could still potentially award baskets during a ball that is released by a shooter. So I just want to make sure that we understand the distinction. Offensive players do not allow us to have continuous motion. Defensive fouls allow us to have continuous motion and only applies to the defense. Our next definition in this topic is shooting, try, and tap. The definition for shooting, try, and tap is under National Federation Rule 4-41. Just for the record, the NCAA does not have a definition that is classified on these particular things under definitions. The act of shooting begins and starts with the try or the tap, and clearly ends when the ball is in flight. A try is for a field goal attempt to score 2 or 3 points throwing at a team's own basket. And again, this is where the official has some judgment to determine when this starts. And finally, within this definition, there's a mention of habitual motion. And habitual motion basically starts when the motion precedes the release of the ball. One of the guidelines for habitual motion is once the dribble is picked up or once a player has caught the ball, that will begin the motion as long as that motion continues on to shooting the basketball or attempting to shoot the basketball. Let's cover habitual motion in detail. Here's an example of a habitual motion play. The player here will drive to the basket and will be fouled before he releases the shot. It is not required for the foul, for shooting foul, to be released first in order to award the basket. This is an example of habitual motion.
Walker, nice pass to Bishop. Basket is good before the...
This is a pass and crash play where we have a foul on the defense, then a pass. Should this play have counted? We have a defensive foul, and it appears that the shooter is very close to being in their habitual motion. But as you can see here, there's a foul. There's no gather or catch by the receiving player. So this play should basically have ended as just a foul. But the shooter is allowed to continue the motion, and in a close game, the basket does count. This is not continuous motion or habitual motion before the shooter releases the ball because we have a defensive foul first.
Ginobili the rebound, has plenty of time to get off a shot. And a foul called on Arthur. Poor decision from Durrell.
This is one of the most difficult decisions to make about a continuous motion play. This is a play near the end of the half or the end of a quarter where a foul is taking place, where a last-second shot is possible. Is this player in the act of shooting, and should we be awarding shots for a last-second attempt? Look at it one more time. A case can be made that this should have been in the act of shooting, but it was not awarded. One more example of an habitual motion play. Drive to the basket, and the shooter is fouled before the release of the shot and is allowed to continue their shot So this is where habitual motion and continuous motion comes into play. A way to figure out when a player has started their habitual motion after a dribble or after a catching of a pass is when they gather the basketball and then proceed to motion towards the basket. I hope this solidifies for you all the ties to how we get the act of shooting. I covered airborne shooter in an earlier video, but with continuous motion and habitual motion, which all ties together what a shooting or a try or tap is. But if you have any further questions, please feel free to contact me at officiatingborn@gmail.com or make a comment below and I will answer any questions that you may have. Thank you for watching to the end of the video. Thank you for watching Officiating Born Training. Thank you very much and subscribe to the channel.